Rob.
All right, Sabrina, thank you. Well, in a TV exclusive, we sit down with a former NOPD detective who helped crack an infamous pedophile ring in the late 70s tied to a local Boy Scout troop.
Yeah, the case centered around Richard Winman, who says he was raped as a little boy by troop leaders and an NOPD officer who was supposed to protect him, and a Jesuit high school janitor while a priest watched.
Kimberly Kurth is in now with that interview.
A detective on the 70s Boy Scout sex abuse investigation says Richard Winman provided key testimony that helped solve the case with international ties. It was 1976, and Mason Spong was a young NOPD detective in the juvenile division. He had worked child abuse cases before, but had no idea one case would soon change his life.
What I'll call a photo mat at one of the local drugstores, a man saw some sexually explicit pictures of young children, and he reported it to the juvenile division.
Spong says that tip led investigators to New Orleans Boy Scout Troop 137.
And these were very young children.
Yes, they were very, very young and very angelic children, very friendly, outgoing. Sometimes the common denominator, well, I should say most of the time, the common denominator was a single parent home, basically poor.
Detectives learned scoutmasters turned the troop into a pedophile ring.
These guys moved in and were able to gain control of the scout troop. They took these kids across the lake to K-Bar-B Ranch, and they had sexual acts over in St. Tammany. And this went on for a while, you know, a couple years before we even came onto these pictures that were turned over to us.
Spong says men traveled to New Orleans to have sex with the boys, and the children were even taken across state lines.
These adults had money to some degree, you know, they were middle class, and those pedophiles would come in from out of town and have the sexual contact here in New Orleans in the homes of these other pedophiles. That's how it happened.
As part of his investigation, Spong met a little boy named Ricky who told him of the horrors he endured.
Ricky popped up as one of our victims, and we formed a friendship with him as we did with all the boys.
That boy, Richard Winman, the same man who told us Jesuit high school janitor Peter Modica raped him as a child while a priest watched in the late 70s. Winman says he received a $450,000 confidential settlement from Jesuit high school for that abuse several years ago.
You were able to corroborate everything that Richard Winman told you as a little boy.
Yes, everything. Ricky was a very angelic child. He was frail. He was very friendly.
Spong, who is now an investigator with the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office, says Raymond Woodall, Richard Stanley Halverson, Harry Kramer, and Louis Ciali were the ringleaders of Boy Scout Troop 137. Winman says he was raped by all four men, and it was Winman's testimony as a little boy that Spong says was critical to the prosecution.
Yes, he was, because I think at some point Ricky was able to speak to these other children, and he got them to trust us.
It was horrible. I mean, you feel embarrassed. You feel like you've done something wrong, and you're sitting there in a courtroom full of adults and media, and you're asked to recount all of this.
It was kind of gut-wrenching, because I've heard these different stories from these different children, and then to hear it again and to watch Ricky testify, he was pretty good. He brought all the facts forward. He was looking at nothing but adults in the courtroom, all strangers, plus he had the press there.
As the case progressed, the detectives involved kept watch of the young victims, but the investigator checking in on Winman was moved to another assignment. So Winman was introduced to the lead detective in the NOPD's pedophile unit at the time.
So he asked Stanley Burkhart to keep an eye on him, you know, because he was special to us. I had 3 other kids that were special to me that I tried to keep a watch on.
Winman says he was victimized once again, this time by Stanley Burkhart.
Burkhart definitely knew the Boy Scouts. all of those guys. And Burkhardt also knew the Jesuit. You know, I played basketball in the back of Jesuit, and there was Burkhardt and Peter Modica on the sidelines, so they knew each other.
Burkhardt was convicted of numerous sex crimes in the 80s and 90s, including possessing child porn and aggravated crime against nature for molesting a young female relative. He was never prosecuted for women's allegations, but according to court documents, Whitman was called to North Carolina as a witness in a 2011 federal case against Burkhardt. The court concluded then that Burkhardt was a sexually dangerous person, and in coming to that opinion, the judge cited significant events in Burkhardt's life, including that while a police officer, he molested Richard Whitman, a young boy at the time. The opinion also says the court finds clear and convincing evidence that the testimony of Mr. Whitman is credible and the denial by Mr. Burkhardt of this incident is not credible.
It was almost more gut-wrenching to hear that one of our own abused Ricky. It was, to me, it was worse than the initial blow when we first started investigating this case, that one of our guys violated this child. It was tough.
The NOPD confirms it has opened an investigation into new sexual assault allegations against Burkhardt. They would only say they have spoken to an alleged victim in the case. According to an online sex offender registry, Burkhardt is now living and working in New Orleans. We went to his house, but we were unable to reach him for comment. Coming up tonight at 5, we will have more with our interview with Spong. Rob.